There's something happening right now that almost nobody is talking about. No protests, no breaking news, no viral moment, just people quietly leaving. A software developer working from an apartment in Tbilisi. A family from Ohio that moved to Colombia and cut their monthly costs nearly in half. A freelancer from Texas running her entire business remotely from a small town in Portugal. Right now, around 9 million American citizens are living outside the United States. If every one of them lived in the same state, that state would be bigger than Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska combined. And these aren't people who failed. They're engineers, teachers, nurses, entrepreneurs, parents, people who had every right to stay, who had built real lives inside the American system. They just chose not to. Here's what makes this genuinely interesting. The United States is still, by most measures, the most powerful economy on Earth. So why are so many Americans, quietly, without announcement, choosing to build their lives somewhere else? The answer isn't one thing, it's 5 things, sitting on top of each other. And by the end of this video, you'll understand all of them clearly. What's actually driving this, why it keeps accelerating, and why the people who acted on it did so years before most people even noticed. We'll cover the real numbers behind American cost of living, why safety became a factor most people didn't see coming, what remote work actually changed, the tax system that follows Americans no matter where they go, and the question underneath all of it: when someone leaves, are they running away, or are they finally making a clear-headed decision? This isn't a case for leaving. It isn't a case for staying. It's just an honest look at something real that a growing number of people are starting to feel, but haven't quite put into words yet. Let's start with the part that surprises people most, because the first reason isn't money. A father in suburban Philadelphia said something a while back that I haven't been able to shake. He said that growing up, he always assumed safety was just part of the background. Something you didn't think about, like running water, like electricity, just there. Now he thinks about it every single day. He has 2 daughters, 9 and 13. Every school morning, every errand, every time they walk to a friend's house down the street, he runs a quiet mental calculation that never fully switches off. He was careful to say he wasn't living in fear, but he had been living with something, a low-level vigilance so familiar it had stopped registering as unusual until he moved. His family relocated to Lisbon. He still works remotely for an American company. Same income, same job. But something about everyday life shifted in a way he hadn't expected. That mental energy that had been quietly running in the background, just gone. He said he no longer has certain conversations with his daughters that he'd always assumed were just a normal part of raising kids today. It turns out, those conversations aren't universal. They belong to a specific place. Gun violence in the United States sits at a level with no real parallel among comparable countries. The numbers shift by year and region, but the overall pattern is consistent and well documented. What's changed in recent years isn't just the statistics themselves. It's how those statistics have worked their way into the texture of ordinary American life, into the calculations parents run without even realizing they're running them. This isn't a political point. It's just what a growing number of American families describe, plainly, when you ask them why they left. And when that question about safety pushes families to start looking outward, researching other countries, comparing costs, weighing options, they almost always run into the second thing pretty quickly. It hits them at the grocery store. Picture an ordinary Tuesday's evening, a couple doing their weekly shop. Nothing unusual on the list. Milk, bread, eggs, chicken, a bag of oranges, some pasta, a block of cheese. The kind of list that hasn't changed much in 30 years. They reach the register. $287 for 1 week of groceries. There's a phrase that's been quietly spreading in American households. People say grocery shopping used to mean filling the trunk. Now everything fits in 2 bags. And the bill is somehow the same. The data behind that feeling is real. Egg prices in the US have at certain points more than doubled year over year. Coffee, something tens of millions of Americans rely on every single morning, went up nearly 40% in 12 months. Bread, cooking oils, fresh produce, all moving in the same direction. Here's the part that makes it so disorienting. A lot of these same households are actually earning more than they were 5 years ago. Wages have gone up by many measures, and yet the experience people describe is the same across the board. No matter how much more comes in, there's somehow less left at the end of the month. Salaries rising, costs rising faster. That gap between income and real purchasing power narrowing quietly, year after year. A woman in Texas watched her electricity bill climb for 3 straight years. Not because she used more power, not because she moved or changed anything. The price just shifted around her. Same electricity, bigger bill. According to recent survey data, 52% of Americans now believe living in another country could offer them a cheaper and better quality of life. And this isn't abstract thinking anymore. People are doing the actual math. In countries like Mexico, Ecuador, and Portugal, the cost of living runs between 50 and 60% of what it costs to maintain a comparable lifestyle in the United States. Put simply, if your household spends $5,000 a month in America, you could potentially live just as well in certain countries for $3,000 or less. A marketing consultant from Chicago moved to Medellin, Colombia last year. Solid income, good career. But after rent, groceries, utilities, transportation, and healthcare, barely anything was left each month. After the move, his total monthly expenses dropped by nearly 40%. He still works for the same American clients. He just no longer lives inside the American cost structure. He described it with this kind of quiet disbelief. His rent in Medellin, he said, was almost exactly what he'd been paying in Chicago just for car insurance and a gym membership. It sounds like a joke, but the math is real, and more people are running it every year. America hasn't stopped working for everyone. There are still millions of people building solid lives and doing well. But something has genuinely shifted in how a growing number of people experience ordinary financial life. And once they start running that cost comparison, they almost immediately hit the thing that worries them even more than groceries. Something most other developed countries sorted out a long time ago. Take a breath here, because this next part is where the numbers get pretty stark. The United States spends more on healthcare per person than any other country in the world. Not slightly more, significantly more. Healthcare represents roughly 20% of the entire American GDP. For every dollar the economy generates, 20 cents flow into the healthcare system. By any logical expectation, that should mean getting medical care is basically the last thing Americans have to worry about. And yet, a middle school teacher in Phoenix broke her wrist last spring. Emergency room, x-rays, a cast. She was home in 3 hours. Routine by every appearance. The bill came 6 weeks later, $4,200. Her insurance covered part of it. She was still paying off the rest 8 months later. That's not an unusual story. For a lot of Americans, it's a completely ordinary one. That financial reality has created a behavior that would seem almost unthinkable in most other developed countries. People skipping medical care, not because they don't know something's wrong, but because they can't be sure they can afford to find out how wrong it is. Survey data backs this up at scale. Around 51% of American adults report having delayed or avoided medical treatment because of cost. Among those earning below $40,000 a year, That number rises to 63%. More than 6 in 10 people in that income bracket have, at some point, chosen to sit with pain rather than open a medical bill. A doctor in a mid-sized American city described a pattern she sees constantly. Patients arriving having quietly managed symptoms for months, sometimes years, before finally coming in. Not because they didn't know something was off, because they were trying to figure out if they could afford to do something about it. She said what bothers her most is this. In most countries, the first question a patient asks is what might be causing their problem. In her waiting room, the first question is usually about what her office's relationship with their insurance company looks like. The quality of American medical care is often genuinely excellent. Advanced technology, skilled specialists, world-class facilities. The concern isn't quality. It's what happens to your financial life when you actually need it. And when Americans start comparing that against what they see in other countries, routine appointments at a fraction of the cost, some systems charging close to nothing for basic care, a pretty practical question starts forming. If I can keep the same income and get comparable health care at dramatically lower personal cost just by changing where I live, why wouldn't I at least look into that? For a long time, that question had an obvious answer. You can't just move. Your career is here. Your clients are here. Your whole professional life is rooted here. And then something happened that changed the entire equation. Before early 2020, leaving the US while keeping your career meant a real trade-off. You could go, but the income largely stayed behind. You'd have to rebuild professionally, in a new country, in a system you didn't know, starting from scratch. The job was the anchor, and the anchor held. Then, in the span of a few months, the anchor lifted. Remote work, which had existed at the edges of professional life for years, became the default for a huge portion of the American workforce almost overnight. Companies that had insisted on in-person attendance for decades adapted in weeks. When things settled down, the work didn't fully go back. Research shows around 25% of paid working days in the United States are now conducted remotely. 1 in 4 working days. No office required, no specific city, no fixed address. That sounds like a minor detail? It isn't. Because when work is no longer tied to a location, the question of where you actually live becomes genuinely open in a way it's never been before. A data analyst at a company in Seattle can do that exact work from a kitchen table in Oaxaca. A designer contracted by a firm in Boston can deliver the same output from Chiang Mai, Thailand. The laptop is the same. The client is the same. The salary is the same. Only the coordinates change. And when you change the coordinates, the entire financial picture shifts. This is the math people describe with a kind of exhausted clarity. American income, non-American cost of living. Not as a dream, as a spreadsheet that actually works. Take Claire, 38 years old, product manager at a tech company in Atlanta. Her company went fully remote during the pandemic and never reversed that decision. She moved to Tbilisi, Georgia, a city in the South Caucasus that most Americans couldn't point to on a map, but one that's become quietly popular among remote workers for exactly this reason. Her rent, $400 a month for a comfortable 2-bedroom, centrally located. Groceries for 2. Under $200 a month. A specialist visit she needed earlier this year cost her roughly what a single copay used to cost her in Atlanta. Her salary, unchanged. Her savings rate, which had sat around 12% in Atlanta despite genuine effort, more than tripled. She said the transition felt surprisingly undramatic. Same hours, same calls, same deliverables. She just stopped handing most of her paycheck to one of the most expensive cost structures in the developed world. The countries on the receiving end of this have noticed. More than 40 countries now offer some form of digital nomad visa, a legal way for people to live in one country while earning income from employers or clients based elsewhere. Portugal, Croatia, Costa Rica, Estonia, Georgia. All of them have built formal programs specifically designed to attract this exact demographic. The message from those countries is straightforward. Bring your foreign income. Spend it here. For a growing number of Americans, that invitation is landing at exactly the right moment. Around 17% of Americans say they're seriously considering living abroad within the next 5 years. Not daydreaming, seriously considering. Running real numbers, researching visas, pricing apartments in cities they've only seen in photos. 17% of the American population is not a small group. That's tens of millions of people treating this as a live option. And when they start doing the actual research, most of them eventually run into something they hadn't anticipated. Something that doesn't make headlines often, but something that follows every American who leaves. No matter how far they go, imagine you've made the decision. You've done the research. Run. The numbers. Made the move. You're in a coastal city in southern Europe. Rent is manageable. The food is good. Healthcare is actually accessible. Life feels genuinely lighter. And then April arrives. An email, a filing reminder, a set of forms with names that look more like security codes than anything you'd recognize. And in that moment, a lot of Americans living abroad realize something that genuinely catches them off guard. You can leave the United States. The tax obligation doesn't leave with you. America is one of a very small number of countries on Earth, and the list really is short, that taxes based on citizenship rather than where you actually live. Nearly every other country ties your tax obligation to your residence, leave, and your tax relationship with that country ends. America doesn't work that way. An American living in Berlin, earning German income, paying German taxes, buying groceries in euros, is still legally required to report their global income to the IRS every year, indefinitely, regardless of how long they've been gone. This is reinforced by a law most Americans have never heard of, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, known as FATCA. Enacted in 2010, it requires financial institutions around the world to report account information for American citizens directly to U.S. tax authorities. Banks in dozens of countries are required to flag their American clients. An American architect who's lived and worked in the Netherlands for 6 years described his annual experience with a kind of tired precision. He's employed by a Dutch firm, earns euros, pays Dutch taxes, spends his income entirely in Europe. Every spring, he files a U.S. tax return. Navigating a set of forms and exemptions, particularly something called the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion, that most regular accountants simply aren't equipped to handle. He pays between $1,500 and $2,000 a year for a specialist who can. His income is European. His life is European. But every April, he said, it feels like running a second job for a country he no longer lives in. FATCA also created a second problem that gets even less attention. Many international banks, aware of the complex reporting requirements attached to American account holders, have quietly become reluctant to open accounts for U.S. citizens at all. Some have refused outright, which means Americans abroad can end up in a genuinely strange position, living in a country, earning income there, paying expenses there, but treated by that country's financial system as a compliance problem that needs special handling. Someone put it this way once, and it stuck. It's a little like having to show 2 passports every time you enter your own house. The American passport is, by almost any measure, one of the most powerful travel documents in the world. For most Americans, most of the time, it's an unqualified asset. But for people who've spent years building a real life somewhere, else it can start to feel like something more complicated. A document that ties you to an obligation you can't fully set down, no matter how far you walk from the place that issued it. And after enough years of managing that, enough tax seasons, enough specialist fees, enough bank rejections. Some people arrive at a thought that would have seemed unthinkable when they first moved. They start seriously asking whether giving up the passport might actually make more sense. There's a specific scene that plays out from time to time at American consulates around the world. A person walks up to the counter, not to apply for anything, not to renew a document, not to register a birth. They're there to permanently give up their American citizenship. It's a rare decision, an irreversible one, and the number of people making it, while still small, has been climbing. According to U.S. government records, close to 4,800 Americans formally renounced their citizenship in 2024 alone. Against a country of 330 million, that's a fraction of a fraction. But as a signal, it means something. Because these aren't people who failed inside the American system. The profile that comes up again and again is remarkably consistent. A tech professional who's lived in Singapore for a decade, a finance executive in Switzerland, a small business owner who built a company in Canada and hasn't been resident in the US in over 12 years. People who, by every conventional measure, succeeded, and then found that the administrative structure still connecting them to that success no longer matched the life they had actually built. A software entrepreneur based in Singapore made this decision 3 years ago. He was straightforward about his reasoning. He didn't leave because he failed in America. He left because an opportunity came up that made more sense somewhere else. And after 10 years of managing dual financial and tax obligations from 12 time zones away, continuing felt like maintaining a relationship that had, practically speaking, ended years ago. He described the American passport honestly. Genuinely valuable, he said. Carrying it felt like something, but wearing it as a permanent administrative obligation, when every part of his actual life had moved elsewhere, had stopped feeling like a privilege, and started feeling like a weight he'd never consciously signed up to carry. Most Americans abroad don't reach this point. Most navigate the system, manage the paperwork, and keep their citizenship for life. But the fact that this question is being seriously considered by a growing number of people and acted on by a growing number is worth paying attention to, because these aren't outliers. They're often the most mobile, most productive, most economically capable people in the American population. And when you zoom out enough to see what those individual decisions look like at scale, something starts to come into focus. For decades, the story of global talent and migration ran in one direction. The world's best people moved toward America. Scientists from Europe, engineers from India, entrepreneurs from everywhere. They came because America offered something no other place could match: scale, resources, opportunity, and the freedom to build at a level that simply wasn't available elsewhere. There was a name for it: brain drain. The way a country loses its most capable people to a stronger pull somewhere else. What's starting to happen now, quietly, gradually, in smaller numbers, but with real consistency, looks like a partial reversal of that. American professionals, employed, skilled, financially capable, choosing to spread themselves across a global map that has, for the first time in history, genuinely opened up. A nurse practitioner who moved to Scotland, a civil engineer doing remote consulting from Lisbon, a photographer running her whole business from Bali, flying back to the US twice a year to see family. These aren't people who couldn't make it in America. They made it. They looked at the terrain around them, and they chose to walk in a different direction, while keeping the same professional foundation under their feet. The people leaving aren't the ones who were struggling at the margins. They're frequently among the most economically productive Americans. People who pay significant taxes, who create, who contribute. The demographic every economy works hardest to hold on to. And when that group starts distributing itself more broadly across the world, the question stops being personal and becomes structural. If a meaningful share of high-earning, high-contributing citizens can permanently decouple their income from their geography and consistently choose somewhere other than America, what does that mean for the country they leave behind? Not tomorrow, not next year, but over time. It's not a crisis. The scale is still small, relative to the total population. But the direction of the trend and the forces making it easier suggest this isn't something that's going to correct itself. This is a feature of the new era, and it's growing. So where does all of this actually leave us? The United States is still the largest, most dynamic economy in the world. Its universities are among the best anywhere. Its technology sector is unmatched in scale. The opportunities inside its borders remain, by a lot of honest measures, genuinely extraordinary. But something is clearly changing in how a growing portion of its people experience everyday life. The cost of ordinary things has quietly compressed household budgets in ways that feel real and persistent. The healthcare system, despite receiving more investment than any comparable country, keeps attaching financial anxiety to the most basic human need of staying healthy. Safety has become an undercurrent in family decisions that previous generations simply didn't have to account for in the same way. And a tax structure that follows citizens across borders adds a layer of friction that is specific, underappreciated, and genuinely hard to escape. Meanwhile, the tools for leaving have never been more within reach. A laptop and a solid internet connection are now enough to maintain a full, professional life without a fixed address. Dozens of countries have built real legal pathways to welcome exactly this kind of person. And the economic math is, for many people, too clear to keep setting aside. The result isn't that Americans are abandoning their country, it's that, for the first time in the country's history, a significant and growing number of Americans have both the means and the motivation to ask a question that would once have seemed almost disloyal. Not, what can I build in America, but, is America still the best place to build it? The fact that this question is being asked and answered more and more often with a one-way ticket is itself the story. Not because it signals the end of American ambition, but because it suggests the American dream may be becoming portable, no longer fixed to a single address, available wherever an American chooses to carry it. Whether that's a good thing or a loss depends entirely on where you're standing. And that's the question worth sitting with. Not whether people are leaving, but what it means that they can, and that more of them, every year quietly, are.